The president of Mexico is furious. She's calling Mexican Senator Lili Tellez a traitor for coming on Fox Noticias with me a few days ago and saying this. Listen.
The help from the United States to fight the cartels in Mexico is absolutely welcome, and that is how the majority of Mexicans feel. The only ones who don't like that President Trump is sending help and trying to support Mexicans against the cartels are the narco politicians. That includes President Sheinbaum.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum responding, saying, quote, "It's not a minor issue that a senator gave an interview to a foreign media outlet calling for intervention." Here to discuss is that Mexican Senator Lili Tellez. Senator Tellez, welcome to Fox Noticias. I'm just going to get right to it. Is Mexico a narco state?
Yes, it is. And we all Mexicans know about it. And Mexicans are afraid of the alliance between the Mexican government and the cartels that have infested our nation.
Can you explain this alliance between the president, her party, the Morena party, and the cartels?
Yes, the party has financed, has given, the cartels have given so much money to these politicians, narco politicians of Morena, to get into office, to get the power. So they protect. The Mexican government protects the cartels. That is why President Sheinbaum doesn't want the strong American leadership to help Mexico defeat the cartels. And also Sheinbaum doesn't want the rest of the world to know what is happening here in Mexico. We are on the steps to be the next Venezuela. She is aligned with Venezuela's dictator, with Cuba, and we are losing our country. They have destroyed our Republican institutions, the democratic state, and we must, I think we all Mexicans want and welcome the support of the United States to assist Mexican people against the cartels that have us all in this crisis with the traffic in fentanyl and migrants.
So her response to this, and I know this because her spokesperson came on our show in response to your interview, and they say, well, we just turned over 26 cartel members. We're working, we're sharing intelligence. What are they not doing? And why is she so resistant? She sort of speaks out of two sides of her mouth. We're working with you, Trump, and then she's chastising you for saying we need more help from the United States to crush the cartels.
Because she really doesn't want the help of the United States. She is lying to Mexican people, telling Mexican people that the United States will get in control of the whole country.
Right.
I never listened such nonsense from President Trump. What we have listened is that President Trump wants to help Mexican people against the cartels. Mexican people are suffering. So what they do is very, very little. We have huge narco politicians here in the Senate, in the presidents, governors. Mexico is a very dangerous place.
Well, that brings me to my next question, because you are speaking very bluntly, very clearly about Mexico being a narco state and the alliance and the connections to the president of Mexico. Are you afraid for your life?
Yes, I am afraid. And the president has threatened me to proceed against me with criminal prosecution, to get me out of the Senate and get me in jail, just because I told you in this space and Fox News what is the reality of our country with the cartels. The cartels are dominating everything here in Mexico. They are in all the offices of the government, in the states, in the cities, and in the national government. So, of course, I am afraid, but I want people to know I will not step back. And I pray under God's guidance that we, the United States and Mexico, must work together to defeat the cartels and to get freedom for our country, for Mexico, to stop it from being the next Venezuela.
Senator Lili Tellez, A very brave woman indeed. Thank you so much for coming on our show and speaking the truth.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.
You got it.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
Guns are up and blazing in what seems like the most epic battle between the Mexican military and Mexican cartels in history. An elite force was just commissioned by the government, and their first bombshell move may just be what starts World War III. We have the details. The point of no return, Mexico's declaration of war. Mexico has just crossed the point of no return. The government has officially unleashed an elite military strike force with one mission only: to destroy every cartel operating within its borders. That's not hyperbole. That's not political theater. This is a direct declaration of war, an all-out campaign to rip apart the most powerful, violent, and wealthy criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. And yet, the moment the plan was announced, security experts, intelligence insiders, and even former US Special Forces veterans began sounding the alarm. This so-called solution might create a nightmare far worse than the disease it's meant to cure. Think about this for a second. Mexico's cartels rake in billions with a B, every year through drug trafficking, human smuggling, and illegal weapons sales. They are entrenched not just in remote mountains or border towns, but in politics, businesses, and entire communities. They've embedded themselves so deeply that many Mexicans don't just fear them, they rely on them. And now, the government thinks a new elite squad is going to tear all that down. That's not just bold, it's dangerous. Because here's the chilling reality. When you cut off a cartel's money, they don't disappear, they turn savage. As one former Special Forces soldier bluntly warned,
now you have 3 or 4 different cartel factions that vie for that next level of power, and you have tons of murder and violence in areas and cities that are completely destabilized.
This is where the story gets darker. You're going to see not just the shiny, government-approved narrative of Mexico finally fighting back. You're going to see the hidden consequences, the ones nobody wants to admit out loud. Because when a government sends its most highly trained killers into urban neighborhoods against cartels armed with military-grade weapons, the real casualty isn't the drug lords, it's civilians, families, children, entire cities. The government's new special forces are modeled after Plan Colombia, a US-backed campaign that spent decades and billions trying to dismantle the FARC guerrillas in South America. Analysts immediately drew the comparison, but even they admitted it's a misleading one. Why? Because the FARC was a single, unified insurgent group. Mexico has at least 10 competing cartels, each with their own armies, revenue streams, and political networks. One expert put it plainly.
You have 10 different cartel organizations that are all competing. I look at more of the cartel sort of like the mafias in the 30s and 40s.
So here's the first dirty truth. Mexico isn't fighting one enemy, it's trying to wage war on 10 simultaneously. And unlike Colombia, the cartels here aren't hiding in jungles, they're living in the middle of cities, interwoven with local economies and law enforcement. You can't just bomb them out. You can't run air raids over Tijuana without wiping out civilians by the thousands. That's why, behind the bravado, even US military analysts admit this war will look nothing like Fallujah or Afghanistan. As one insider warned,
okay, this isn't Iraq in 2006. This isn't Fallujah, where we can just do call outs into Tijuana or wherever a city and then just be like, if you aren't out by tomorrow at noon, everybody dies inside. This is an allied nation. Okay, so civilian casualties is a massive consideration.
And that's the terrifying contradiction at the center of this whole mission. Mexico wants to eradicate the cartels, but the cartels are the communities. They own the car dealerships, the construction companies, even legal marijuana operations in the US. They pay local police. They bankroll politicians. In some towns, the cartel literally is the economy. And ripping that out overnight, that's like yanking the foundation out from under an entire country. Which brings us to the second dirty truth: money. If you kill cartel profits, you create armies of unemployed, angry young men who know nothing except violence. That's not a theory. It's a historical fact. We've seen it in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Colombia. So instead of destroying cartels, Mexico's new war could end up manufacturing new ones, smaller, hungrier, more violent, and more desperate than the last. Don't think for one second that the cartels will just sit back and let it happen. History shows exactly how they respond. When the Mexican army launched an all-out war against them in 2006, the cartels retaliated with terrorist-style assassinations of politicians, mass killings, and waves waves of bloodshed that left tens of thousands dead. That's not speculation. That's documented history, which is why the most frightening prediction of all is that once again, the cartels will bring the fight directly onto US soil. Stop and think about that for a moment. We're not talking about distant, abstract violence in Mexico. We're talking about US mayors, border town police chiefs, even ordinary American families becoming targets of cartel revenge attacks. We've already seen how quickly they adapt guerrilla tactics, how they operate in the shadows like insurgent armies, and now we're opening the door for them to unleash it inside the United States itself. Politicians are celebrating this move as if Mexico has finally found its silver bullet. They're selling this as the moment cartels finally meet their match. But the truth, this war could very easily spiral into one of the bloodiest counterinsurgency campaigns of the 21st century, right in America's backyard. America's secret war, the hidden battle already raging. If Mexico's war against the cartels feels like a powder keg, America's response is the gasoline being poured right on top of it. Because while the Mexican government is unleashing its elite special forces, the United States has already been waging its own secret war, a war fought through mass deportations, militarized borders, and intelligence operations that blur the line between counterterrorism and counter-narcotics. Let's be brutally honest here. America isn't acting out of charity. This isn't about saving Mexico from itself. This is about protecting US soil from the tidal wave of fentanyl, meth, heroin, and human trafficking pouring across the border. It's about the fact that hundreds of thousands of young Americans are dying from overdoses every year, casualties in a war that most politicians won't even call a war. That's exactly why, in Washington, momentum has been building for years to treat the cartels the same way we treat ISIS or Al-Qaeda, as terrorist organizations. President Trump went as far as to brand them terrorists, publicly warning that any attack on US agents or soldiers would bring down the wrath of the American military. As Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, put it in one interview.
You heard a border patrol and you heard a soldier. The wrath of President Trump's going to come down.
Does that mean the military, our troops, U.S. military at the border, with weapons, using weapons if need be?
That statement wasn't just rhetoric. It was a chilling warning that the US was prepared to unleash military power against cartels the same way it has against terrorists overseas. But here's the problem. The moment you escalate cartel crackdowns into open military conflict, you turn the United States into a direct combatant. And history tells us exactly how cartels respond to that, with blood in the streets. Even before Trump's declaration, cartels were already waging their own brand of insurgency in Mexico. They ambushed military convoys, they massacred politicians, they unleashed urban warfare with military-grade weapons, and according to intelligence reports, their arsenals are terrifying. A 2020 review found that groups like the Sinaloa Cartel and CJNG possess not just assault rifles, but grenade launchers, anti-tank weapons, and even weaponized drones. One analyst described them bluntly.
Over the years, it has acquired a broad range of modern weaponry, including assault rifles, grenade launchers, drones, anti-personnel mines, anti-tank weapons, and grenades.
Stop and think about that. These aren't just gangs, they're armies. Armies sitting less than a day's drive from American cities. That's why US intelligence agencies, the DEA, FBI, ICE, and even the CIA, have already been conducting deep infiltration operations on both sides of the border. In fact, some insiders admit that America's intelligence footprint in Mexico is alarmingly thin. Think about how insane that is. Mexico is the epicenter of America's drug crisis, and yet the US doesn't even have reliable intelligence on where cartel leaders are, how their supply chains operate, or what their next moves might be. That's not just a blind spot, it's a national security nightmare. It's why US agencies have been forced to fall back on the bluntest weapon they have, mass deportation. According to ICE, tens of thousands of cartel affiliates, smugglers, and criminals have been rounded up in the United States and sent back to Mexico. The strategy is simple: flood Mexico with its problem. But here's the catch. When you deport trained killers, you're not solving the problem. You're reinforcing the cartels. Even Tom Homan, the hardliner at the center of Trump's border machine, admitted that deportations often meant releasing cartel-affiliated criminals right back into the ecosystem.
That's the target of the operation, right? But where the collateral arrests happen when we're looking for the bad guy, and we find others with them. And we have told ICE officers they're going to enforce the law. Unlike the last administration, we're not telling ICE agents, ignore the oath you took, ignore the immigration law. Your immigration officers enforce those enforce those laws.
Translation: anyone caught in the dragnet gets dumped across the border, where cartels scoop them up, arm them, and throw them straight back into the fight. It's a vicious cycle. While Washington sells this as a tough-on-crime solution, the reality is far more disturbing. America is strengthening the very cartels it claims to be fighting. But deportation isn't the only weapon. The southern border has been transformed into a militarized fortress. Walls, razor wire, thousands of troops, and surveillance tech straight out of a war zone. Officially, it's about stopping illegal crossings. In practice, it's about choking off the cartel supply lines of fentanyl and trafficked humans. And according to military strategists, it's working, at least in the short term. In other words, the wall isn't the end of the war, it's the spark. Because when you starve cartels of billions of dollars in drug profits, you don't weaken them, you provoke them. And experts are already warning that the next wave of cartel violence will spill over directly into American cities. Imagine San Antonio, Phoenix, or San Diego suddenly facing the kind of car bombings and political assassinations that have long been a grim reality in Mexico. That's not a hypothetical, that's a chilling forecast. Cartels already have the infrastructure inside the United States to make it happen. Investigations have revealed that cartels own businesses, launder money through legitimate storefronts, and operate deep within American cities, all while keeping their heads low. Why? Because the drug money was flowing freely. But if America chokes off that pipeline, what's to stop them from unleashing chaos on US soil? Here's what politicians don't want you to hear. America's so-called war on the cartels isn't clean, it isn't controlled, and it isn't new. For decades, the US has been pulling strings behind the scenes, sometimes with shocking success, and other times with catastrophic blowback. Look no further than Plan Colombia. That US-backed effort pumped more than $15 billion into a 20-year war to dismantle South America's cocaine empire. The result? The FARC surrendered their weapons and transformed into a political party. Sounds like a success story, right? Except here's the truth. The cocaine trade never disappeared. It simply shifted routes and morphed into new organizations. And guess who learned from that playbook? Mexico's cartels. The dirty little secret nobody wants to say on camera: America helped create this monster. For decades, US demand for drugs has been the single largest funding source for cartels. Every gram of fentanyl, every kilo of cocaine, every shipment of meth, all of it exists because Americans keep buying. As one analyst bitterly pointed out, more cartel-like entities are going to rise and replace and fill the void. In other words, you can kill bosses, raid compounds, and build walls, but as long as Americans are hooked, someone will rise to fill the void. That's why, despite decades of the so-called war on drugs, cartels have only grown more powerful, more sophisticated, and more lethal. So where does that leave us? With a terrifying equation, America is militarizing the border, starving cartels of profits, and deporting cartel-affiliated criminals back into Mexico, all while fueling demand that guarantees the cartels will never disappear. That's not a strategy. That's a recipe for endless bloodshed. The nuclear options: what might actually work? After 2 parts of chaos, bloodshed, and nightmare scenarios, you might be asking, is there anything that could actually work against the cartels? The uncomfortable answer is yes, there are strategies, but every single one of them comes with explosive risks. Because when you're dealing with cartels, there's no such thing as a clean solution. So let's rip the bandage off and talk about the few weapons that could actually break their grip on Mexico and why most politicians don't have the courage to use them. First, the elephant in the room: money. Cartels are businesses before they are armies, and businesses survive on revenue. Cut off their money supply and you cripple them. That's not theory, it's reality. The US proved this with terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. By freezing accounts, monitoring wire transfers, and choking off smuggling routes, entire networks collapsed. The same logic applies here. Cartels launder billions through US real estate, car dealerships, shipping companies, and even legal cannabis businesses. That's why insiders argue the most effective strike isn't with guns, it's with accountants. Sounds simple, right? Follow the money. But here's the problem. The cartels are masters at hiding cash. They use shell companies, cryptocurrency, offshore banks. They spread it so thin across so many industries that ripping it out would require a level of financial transparency that the US itself doesn't even enforce on its own billionaires. That's the hypocrisy that keeps cartels alive. Politicians will pound podiums about law and order, but they won't touch the banks, real estate moguls, and corporate fronts that make cartel money disappear. Why? Because those same institutions are tied into American American politics. The second strategy, intelligence. And right now, America admits it's basically flying blind in Mexico. That's insane when you realize this is the single greatest national security threat sitting on America's doorstep. Without intelligence, every drone strike, every raid, every special forces mission is basically shooting in the dark. And in Mexico, missing your target doesn't just mean failure, it means slaughtering civilians and handing cartels a propaganda victory. What could work? Full-scale intelligence fusion centers, joint US-Mexico task forces where data from DEA, CIA, FBI, and Mexican military is combined in real time. In Colombia, that's exactly what allowed the US to finally locate and kill Pablo Escobar. Without those fusion centers, Escobar might still be running Medellin today. But here's the kicker. Fusion centers only work if Mexico's government can be trusted. And let's be honest, Mexico is riddled with corruption. Entire police units are on cartel payrolls. Judges have been bribed. Even governors and generals have been caught collaborating with traffickers. That means every piece of intelligence shared risks being leaked directly back to the cartels, which leads to the third weapon, international cooperation. Some US politicians have already floated the nuclear option, formally designating cartels as terrorist organizations. On paper, it sounds like a silver bullet. The moment they're labeled terrorists, the US can deploy military assets, freeze bank accounts globally, and hunt down cartel leaders the same way they did bin Laden. But ask yourself, what happens the day after America launches drone strikes on cartel compounds in Mexico? Civilian deaths, riots, diplomatic collapse, and, as one veteran chillingly warned the public,
6 months from now, you start seeing domestic terrorist attacks, Americans dying. Is the appetite going to be there in those border cities, in those border states at that point? I don't know, man. You know, San Diego starts having car bombs blow up and killing thousands of people.
That's the nightmare scenario. Treating cartels as terrorists might give America legal cover to unleash its military might, but it also guarantees blowback inside US borders. Is there another way? Yes, it's messy, it's controversial, but many experts argue it's the only long-term fix. Take away the cartels' markets, and that means legalization. Whether we like it or not, cartels exist because Americans buy drugs. Every gram of fentanyl, every ounce of cocaine, every brick of meth is worth its weight in gold as long as it's illegal. But legalize it, regulate it, tax it, control it, and suddenly the cartels lose their monopoly. This isn't speculation, it's history. When alcohol was banned in the 1920s, violent mafias rose up to dominate the market. The second prohibition was lifted, and the black market collapsed. Mafia bosses lost billions overnight. Legalization has already shown results. In US states where cannabis is legal, cartel profits from marijuana have plummeted. Entire smuggling routes have gone dry. But here's the problem. The cartels adapted. They shifted into fentanyl, meth, and human trafficking. So would legalization solve everything? No, but it would slash a massive chunk of their profits and force them into riskier, more traceable businesses. And when criminals are forced into risk, they make mistakes. Mistakes that law enforcement can exploit. But legalization terrifies politicians, because the moment you suggest it, you're accused of being soft on crime, which is why, even though it may be the most effective weapon against cartels, it's also the one least likely to be used. The fourth weapon, communities. And this one might surprise you, because for all their violence, cartels thrive on loyalty. In poor towns across Mexico, cartels don't just rule with fear, they rule with charity. They pay for food, schools, and funerals. They give jobs to young men who would otherwise starve. That's why, when the Mexican army rolls into cartel territory, civilians don't cheer. They riot, they block roads, they throw stones at soldiers. Because to them, the cartel isn't just a criminal organization, it's a lifeline. So if you want to dismantle the cartels, you have to replace that lifeline. Jobs, infrastructure, schools, healthcare. In other words, you have to outcompete the cartels at being the government. But that's the one thing Mexico's government has failed to do for decades. And until that changes, every elite squad or special operation is doomed to fail. Let's talk about the one thing cartels fear more than bullets: exposure. For decades, their power has thrived in the shadows: whisper networks, coded messages, bribed officials, but drag them into the light. Suddenly, their mystique of invincibility shatters, and this is where technology becomes a potential game changer. The same tools Silicon Valley uses to sell ads can be weaponized to hunt cartels. Facial recognition, AI-driven surveillance, drones capable of flying silently over cartel-controlled mountains. These aren't gadgets of the future. They're here, now. Already, US Customs and Border Protection has experimented with AI that can track smuggling routes by analyzing patterns in desert footprints, heat signatures, and even cell phone metadata. Imagine that scaled up, where every shipment, every encrypted message, every cash transfer is tracked in real time. Suddenly, the cartel's greatest weapon, secrecy, becomes their greatest vulnerability. But here's the catch. Technology cuts both ways. Cartels aren't stuck in the 1990s anymore. They already deploy weaponized drones, encrypted apps, and counter-surveillance gear. In some cases, their tech rivals local governments. So yes, America can throw tech at the problem, but the cartels adapt just as fast, sometimes faster. And the question becomes, who evolves quicker? Another possible weapon, extradition. Mexican prisons are playgrounds for cartels, bribed guards, hidden tunnels, luxury cells with TVs and women smuggled in. Locking up a cartel boss in Mexico doesn't end his career, it just relocates his office. That's why the US has pushed so hard for extraditing cartel leaders directly into American prisons. El Chapo Guzman was Exhibit A. For years, he escaped maximum security Mexican prisons with laughable ease. But the moment he was extradited to the United States, that was the end of his empire. Today, he's rotting in a Colorado supermax with zero chance of escape. Extradition works, but Mexico hates it. Because every time the US demands extradition, it exposes how weak Mexico's justice system really is. It's a humiliation, proof that the Mexican state can't control its own criminals. And politically, it inflames nationalist anger. Many Mexicans see it as the US playing colonial master, dragging away their citizens for judgment. But if you want to talk about divisive, nothing tops the final option, full-blown military intervention. Some US politicians have already said it openly. Send in the Marines, deploy drone strikes, treat cartels like terrorists, and eliminate them with overwhelming force. In classified simulations, the Pentagon has mapped out how it would fight a cartel war. Airstrikes on drug labs, Navy blockades to choke shipping routes, Special Forces raids on leadership compounds. Could it work? Militarily, yes. The US has the firepower to reduce entire cartels to ashes in weeks. But the cost? Civilian deaths on a staggering scale. Entire cities could be caught in crossfire, refugee waves would flood north, and most chilling of all, the cartels would almost certainly retaliate with terrorism on US soil. So while military intervention might look like a solution, in reality, it's a Pandora's box that once opened, can't be closed. And that leaves the final, most uncomfortable weapon of all, addressing demand inside the United States. Because, let's stop pretending. The reason cartels are billion-dollar empires isn't because Mexico is weak. It's because America is addicted. Fentanyl doesn't sell itself. Cocaine doesn't teleport across the border. Every overdose death in Ohio, every fentanyl bust in Arizona, every meth lab in the Midwest, those are all American dollars funding Mexican cartels. So if you really want to cripple cartels, the answer isn't just in Mexico. It's in American suburbs, colleges, and nightclubs. It's in treatment centers, mental health programs, and economic reforms that reduce addiction. In other words, the only permanent fix is to kill demand. But here's the dirty secret. Killing demand doesn't win elections. Politicians get applause for walls, for raids, for fiery speeches about terrorists. They don't get applause for investing in rehab centers. And so the cycle continues. America feeds the beast with one hand and pretends to fight it with the other. Keep in mind that while the war just intensified, it didn't just start. The cartel problem in Mexico has been a persistent issue for decades, with roots dating back to the 1980s. Initially, Mexican cartels focused on marijuana and cocaine trafficking, but over time, they expanded into other illicit activities such as heroin and methamphetamine production, extortion, and human trafficking. One of the primary factors contributing to the cartel's persistence is corruption within law enforcement and government agencies. Cartels have bribed or coerced officials to turn a blind eye to their activities or provide protection. This corruption has enabled cartels to operate with relative impunity, contributing to the violence and instability that has plagued Mexico. In 2006, the Mexican government launched a military crackdown on cartels, which led to increased violence and fragmentation of cartels. This fragmentation has resulted in the emergence of new, smaller cartels and the proliferation of violence. The situation has become increasingly complex, with various cartels operating in different regions and the government facing challenges in addressing the issue. Today, Mexico continues to grapple with cartel violence, corruption, and the flow of illicit drugs into the United States and other countries. The relationship between cartels and corrupt officials remains deeply intertwined, with cartels using violence and intimidation to control territory and populations, while corrupt officials may accept bribes or provide protection in exchange for personal gain. To effectively address the cartel problem in Mexico, it is essential to tackle corruption and violence. This can be achieved through a combination of law enforcement efforts, judicial reform, and social programs aimed at reducing poverty and inequality. Additionally, international cooperation and support are crucial in disrupting the flow of illicit drugs and dismantling cartel operations. By understanding the complex history and dynamics of the cartel problem in Mexico, we can work towards finding effective solutions to this pressing issue. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.